Machiavellian. One single word, and the imagination ignites. We think of manipulation, cunning, and the cold cruelty of power. We picture secret plots, ruthless princes, and strategists willing to do anything to keep their thrones. Yet behind this word, now synonymous with deceit, stands a man, a thinker, a writer, Niccolò Machiavelli. And the question is simple: have we understood him, or have we betrayed him? For Machiavelli is not merely the author of The Prince, that small book which forever changed the course of political thought. He is also a witness to a torn era, the Italian Renaissance, when city-states crumbled under wars, betrayals, and ambitions. He was the diplomat who saw kings, popes, and mercenaries up close, and who dared to say what no one else would. Politics does not obey the laws of morality, but those of necessity. That is why Machiavelli still shocks us today, because he tears away the mask of fine words to reveal the naked face of power. Because he dares to write that a ruler must be both lion and fox, strength and cunning, force and subtlety. Because he dares to separate politics from religion, effectiveness from virtue. But to reduce Machiavelli to a mere cynic would be a grave mistake. Behind the image of the manipulator lies a thinker of freedom, a defender of the republic, a man who believed that conflict and discord could be sources of political vitality. Machiavelli is not just the teacher of princes. He is the philosopher of the people. So, in this podcast, we will dive into his philosophy. We will explore his context, his concepts, his paradoxes. We will uncover why he was so despised, and why he remains, even today, indispensable. For to understand Machiavelli is not to learn how to deceive, it is to learn how to see power as it truly is. To understand Machiavelli, one must first understand Florence. For Machiavelli was not an abstract thinker locked away in an ivory tower. He was a man of his time, a diplomat, an observer, a participant immersed in the turmoil of the Italian Renaissance. And that age was anything but peaceful. Florence, a brilliant yet fragile city. By the late 15th century, Florence was one of the richest and most dazzling cities in Italy. It was the homeland of the Medici, the family of bankers who turned the city into a cradle of art and culture. It was the city of Dante, Giotto, Brunelleschi, and Botticelli. It was the birthplace of the Renaissance, where ancient texts were rediscovered and a new vision of humanity and the world was born. Yet behind this cultural splendor lay political fragility. Florence was an unstable republic, shaken by factional strife, threatened by its neighbors, and dependent on the precarious balance among Italy's great powers. A divided and coveted Italy. For the Italy of Machiavelli was not a unified nation, but a mosaic of city-states: Florence, Venice, Milan, Naples, Rome, locked in endless wars. To this were added the ambitions of the great European monarchies, France, Spain, and the Holy Roman Empire. Italy was a battlefield where foreign powers came to impose their will. In 1494, King Charles VIII of France invaded the peninsula, opening a long era of wars that would last for decades. As a young man, Machiavelli saw his homeland delivered to the appetites of others. Machiavelli's career. Born in 1469 into a modest yet educated family, Machiavelli received a strong humanist education. In 1498, at the age of 29, he entered the service of the Florentine Republic as Secretary of the Chancery. It was the beginning of a diplomatic career that brought him face to face with the great figures of his time: Louis XII of France, Pope Julius II, and Cesare Borgia. He observed closely the games of power, alliances, and betrayals. He learned that politics was not a world of pure ideas, but a theater of forces, stratagems, and chance. The decisive encounter with Cesare Borgia. Among all his encounters, that with Cesare Borgia proved decisive. The son of Pope Alexander VI and a formidable condottiere, Borgia embodied for Machiavelli the political man capable of combining virtù and fortuna, strength and skill, courage and cunning, the ability to seize opportunity. Machiavelli admired the way he conquered and consolidated power, even as he witnessed his sudden fall after his father's death. From this, Machiavelli drew a crucial lesson. Power is fragile. It demands constant vigilance, and skill alone is not enough. One must also know how to master fortune. The fall of Florence and Machiavelli's exile. Machiavelli's career was shattered in 1512 when the Medici regained power in Florence. Accused of conspiracy, he was imprisoned, tortured, and then exiled. It was in this disgrace that he wrote The Prince, 1513, dedicated to Lorenzo de' Medici. It was not an academic treatise, but a manual of political survival, born of experience and disillusionment. Machiavelli did not write to please. He wrote to tell the naked truth. This is what one must do to gain and keep power. A philosophy born of chaos. Machiavelli's thought, then, was not abstract speculation. It was born from the chaos of his time: wars, invasions, betrayals, the fall and rebirth of regimes. It arose from direct observation of men in power, their triumphs, and their downfalls. It came from the conviction that to understand politics, one must look at it as it is, not as we wish it to be. When Machiavelli wrote The Prince in 1513, he was no longer a man of power. He had been expelled from Florence, imprisoned, tortured, and then cast into bitter exile. It was in that solitude that he composed this blazing text dedicated to Lorenzo de' Medici. The Prince is not an academic treatise. It is a manual for political survival, born of first-hand experience and disillusionment. What strikes the reader first is its radical break with tradition. Until then, political philosophy had always tied power to morality. To govern was to be just, to embody virtue, to extend divine order onto the earth. Machiavelli dares to shatter that link. He declares that anyone who wishes to endure must learn how not to be good, that he must know how to enter into evil when necessity demands it. That is the scandal. Politics is no longer the continuation of morality, but an autonomous realm governed by its own laws. In this work, Machiavelli distinguishes between two essential moments: conquering power and keeping it. Conquest requires virtù, an untranslatable quality blending courage, intelligence, audacity, and the ability to seize opportunity. But preservation demands something else: prudence, cunning, and the capacity to inspire both fear and respect. It is in this context that he writes his most famous line: "It is better to be feared than loved, if one cannot be both." Not because he despises love, but because he understands that love is fragile, changeable, dependent on gratitude. Fear, by contrast, is more stable, so long as it does not turn into hatred. The prince must therefore strike a balance, severe enough to command respect, but not so cruel as to invite hatred. To illustrate this principle, Machiavelli forges an image that has become emblematic. The prince must be both lion and fox. Lion, to embody strength, power, and deterrence. Fox, to avoid traps, manipulate appearances, and deceive when necessary. Politics is neither a game of pure strength nor one of pure deception. It is the art of combining the two. He who is only a lion will be ensnared. He who is only a fox will be crushed. Only he who can be both at once will endure. Two key concepts structure the entire book: virtù and fortuna. Virtù is not moral virtue. It is the capacity to act effectively, to impose one's will, to create order amid chaos. Fortuna is chance, fate, the unpredictable flow of events. Machiavelli compares it to a raging river. One cannot stop it from flooding, but one can build dikes to contain its destruction. The good ruler is the one who can unite virtù and fortuna, who knows how to seize opportunity, master uncertainty, and transform chance into advantage. From this comes the phrase that built his infamous reputation: the end justifies the means. In truth, Machiavelli never wrote it in those exact words, but the spirit is there. A ruler must be ready to use deceit, cruelty, or manipulation if necessary to save the state. Not out of love for evil, but out of realism. For the worst crime, in Machiavelli's eyes, is not cruelty. It is the loss of power and the descent of one's people into chaos. The Prince is therefore not a praise of tyranny, but a manual of lucidity. Machiavelli does not say, "Be cruel." He says, "Know that sometimes, to save the state, you will have to be." He does not say, "Always deceive." He says, "Know when deception is necessary." It is not an apology for evil. It is a description of reality. And it is precisely that lucidity which still unsettles us today, because it forces us to see power as it is, not as we wish it to be. With Machiavelli, a decisive turning point occurs. Politics ceases to be understood as a branch of morality or theology. Until then, both philosophical and Christian traditions had always bound power to an ethical demand. To govern was to be just, to embody virtue, to extend divine order on earth. But Machiavelli, a lucid observer of the princes and popes of his time, saw that those who survived and succeeded were not the most virtuous, but the most skillful. He dared to write that a ruler must learn how not to be good, that he must be able to enter into evil when necessity requires it, not out of a taste for cruelty, but because politics is a realm in which the survival of the state outweighs moral purity. Here lies the scandal. Machiavelli does not deny the importance of morality in private life, but he insists that in the political sphere, morality can be fatal. A prince who sought to act always according to Christian goodness would quickly be crushed by less scrupulous rivals. The one who wishes to endure must master two registers, that of the man and that of the beast. Machiavelli writes that the prince must be both lion and fox, a lion to embody strength and command fear, a fox to avoid traps and deceive when necessary. Politics is not a kingdom of angels, but an arena where cunning and force are the only effective weapons. In asserting this, Machiavelli breaks with centuries of Christian thought. He does not deny God, but he refuses to make religion the rule of political action. Religion can be useful, to unite a people, to inspire fear, to provide moral cohesion, but it is not the prince's compass. The ruler must think above all in terms of effectiveness, stability, and the preservation of power. Christian morality demands that one turn the other cheek. Machiavelli replies that he who turns the other cheek will lose his kingdom. Religion teaches charity and forgiveness. Machiavelli reminds us that in the real world, weakness invites betrayal. This brutal realism earned Machiavelli accusations of immorality, even of diabolism. Yet in truth, he merely describes what he observes. He does not say, "Be cruel," but rather, "Know that sometimes, to save the state, you must be." He does not say, "Always deceive," but, "Know when deception is necessary for survival." It is not a defense of evil. It is a clear-eyed understanding of human nature and the mechanisms of power. By separating politics from morality and religion, Machiavelli effectively founds modern political science. He makes politics an autonomous sphere governed by its own laws, independent of theology and ethics. He opens the path to a realistic analysis of power, stripped of illusions and ideals. And it is precisely this rupture that continues to disturb us today, for it forces us to see power as it is, not as we wish it to be. Machiavelli is often reduced to the prince, that small manual of power that gave him his infamous reputation. But it would be a mistake not to read, alongside it, his discourses on the first decade of Livy, published after his death. For in these pages, Machiavelli does not write for a prince, but for a people. He does not speak of monarchy, but of republics. And the image that emerges is quite different, that of a thinker who believes in freedom, in institutions, and in the political vitality of a people capable of governing themselves. In the discourses, Machiavelli takes Rome as his model. He observes that the greatness of the Roman Republic did not come from harmony, but from conflict. Where many thinkers condemned the struggles between the Senate and the people, Machiavelli argued the opposite, that these dissensions were the very source of Roman liberty. For it was out of the confrontation between the nobles and the populace that the laws protecting everyone's freedom were born. The cries, the unrest, the apparent disorder were not signs of decay, but proofs of vitality. A republic without conflict, he writes, is a dead republic. This is a radical idea. Disorder can be creative, discord can be fruitful, and conflict can be the very condition of liberty. Machiavelli also insists on the necessity of solid institutions. Freedom is not preserved by the virtue of citizens alone, but by laws that channel passions and organize power relations. The Romans, he notes, knew how to create magistracies, tribunates, and counterweights that prevented any single group from dominating. Liberty is not a natural state. It is a fragile political construction that demands vigilance and discipline. This Republican Machiavelli is often forgotten, for he contradicts the image of the cynic obsessed with the cunning of princes. Yet he is essential to understanding the coherence of Machiavelli's thought. For in the end, whether he addresses a prince or a people, Machiavelli is always asking the same question: how can power endure? In The Prince, he answers for a single ruler. In the Discourses, for an entire city. In both cases, he rejects moral and religious illusions and seeks the real mechanisms of political stability. What is striking is that Machiavelli does not believe in an ideal, pure republic free of conflict. He believes in a living republic, full of tensions, yet capable of transforming those tensions into laws, institutions, and balance. He does not dream of a perfect people, but of a people who, through their very struggles, learn to defend their freedom. And here Machiavelli joins the great modern thinkers. He understands that politics is not the art of abolishing conflict, but the art of organizing it. Thus, behind the image of the cynical Machiavelli lies the Republican Machiavelli, one who loves his homeland, who believes that liberty is better than servitude, and that the vitality of a people is stronger than the cunning of a prince. To read the Discourses on Livy is to discover another face of Machiavelli, not the master of tyrants, but the thinker of republics. For 5 centuries, Machiavelli has never ceased to divide opinion. His name has become an adjective, Machiavellian, synonymous with manipulation, duplicity, and cold cruelty. This is the first great misunderstanding. To reduce Machiavelli to a master of evil, a cynical advisor who supposedly taught princes the art of deceit and domination. Yet this caricature does not do justice to the depth of his thought. Machiavelli never wrote to glorify cruelty, but to describe politics as it truly is. He did not invent deceit, violence, or manipulation. He merely dared to name them, to analyze them, to lay them bare. And it is precisely this lucidity that shocked his contemporaries and still unsettles us today. From the moment it was published, The Prince was condemned by the Church. In 1559, it was placed on the index of forbidden books. Moralists denounced it as corrupting, theologians as diabolical. Yet, at the same time, men of power read it in secret, fascinated by its unvarnished analysis of political mechanisms. The centuries that followed only deepened this ambivalence. For some, Machiavelli was the theorist of tyranny, the inspiration for dictators. For others, he was the founder of modern political science, the one who had the courage to separate politics from morality and religion, making it an autonomous domain governed by its own laws. His influence is immense. In the 17th century, Hobbes borrowed his realism to conceive of the state as a leviathan, a guarantor of peace through strength. In the 18th century, Montesquieu engaged with his ideas while thinking about institutions capable of limiting power. Rousseau, though critical, admitted that The Prince is the book of republicans, for by exposing the logic of absolute power, it teaches peoples to distrust it. Later, in the 19th century, Hegel saw in Machiavelli the thinker of political modernity, and in the 20th, Max Weber took up his distinction between the ethics of conviction and the ethics of responsibility. Even in the realm of military theory, Clausewitz, the great analyst of war, stands in Machiavelli's realist tradition. But beyond philosophers, Machiavelli shaped history itself. His ideas nourished the English, American, and French revolutions, where his discourses on Livy were reread to rethink republicanism and liberty. They also inspired strategists, diplomats, and modern leaders, sometimes in the noblest sense, sometimes in the darkest. For Machiavelli does not offer a morality, he offers tools. And like all tools, they can be used to build or to destroy. The misunderstanding endures because Machiavelli refuses illusions. He does not tell us what we want to hear. He tells us what we would rather ignore. He reminds us that politics is made of ambition, fear, cunning, and violence. He forces us to see power as it is, not as we wish it to be. That is why he is both detested and indispensable. Detested because he destroys our illusions. Indispensable because he arms us against them. Even today, his legacy lives on. In a world shaken by crises, media manipulation, and power struggles, Machiavelli remains a mirror. He shows us that politics is not a moral tale, but a battlefield of forces. He reminds us that freedom is never granted, but always fought for and defended. And he warns us that those who refuse to see reality as it is will always be the victims of those who have understood it. Machiavelli does not belong solely to the 16th century. His thought, born in the streets of Florence and forged amid the turmoil of the Italian wars, continues to speak to us because it touches on something profoundly universal: the nature of power, the fragility of institutions, and the truth of human passions. 5 centuries have passed, yet his words still resonate with unsettling clarity. For the world he describes, one of cunning, force, chance, and calculation, has not vanished, it is our own. Today we live in societies saturated with communication, image strategies, and struggles for influence. Leaders, whether political, economic, or media figures, must constantly navigate the same dialectic of virtù and fortuna, their personal skill and the unpredictability of circumstance. Health crises, geopolitical upheavals, technological revolutions, all remind us that fortune remains that raging river which overflows and sweeps everything away. Yet, as Machiavelli said, it is possible to build dikes, to prepare, anticipate, and turn the unpredictable into opportunity. That is why Machiavelli remains strikingly modern. He teaches us that politics is not a moral tale, but a difficult art, where effectiveness outweighs intention. He reminds us that people may forgive occasional cruelty, but never prolonged weakness. He warns that contempt and hatred are the two mortal dangers for any ruler. And he shows that freedom is not preserved by harmony, but by organized conflict, by institutions capable of channeling human passions. But we must also beware of misunderstandings. To read Machiavelli is not to learn how to deceive, manipulate, or dominate. It is to learn how to see clearly. It is to accept the power of looking at reality without disguise, without masks, without illusion. It is to understand that morality and politics are not the same, and that those who refuse to see the distinction risk being crushed by those who do. Machiavelli does not tell us how to be good. He tells us how to be lucid. And that lucidity, far from cynicism, can become a weapon in the defense of freedom. So, what remains of Machiavelli today? a lesson in realism, an invitation not to be deceived by rhetoric, but to observe actions. A reminder that power is always a fragile balance between strength and cunning, between virtue and fortuna. A warning against the illusions that make us vulnerable. And perhaps, above all, a demand never to look away from reality, even when it is hard to face. Dear listeners, if I had to sum up Machiavelli in one sentence, it would be this. To understand Machiavelli is not to learn how to be Machiavellian. It is to learn how to see power as it truly is. And in a world overflowing with illusions, that lucidity may be the greatest strength of all.